So what do you actually get when you order a Planet 3? This is the sun gear. It goes on top of the rotor and the hub, and it rotates with the wheel. The little planet with the permanent neodymium magnet goes on top of the sun gear and rotates around 3 times slower than the sun gear. It's all covered and completely sealed by the ring gear, which has internal gearing, which enables the whole magic to happen. You also get a longer sensor carrier, which is 9.5 millimeters longer than the original, which wasn't strictly necessary, but it enables us to have a much weaker magnet than the original one, which enables a much longer and quieter operation of the device. You also get 6 M5 bolts with pre-applied Loctite, and you will probably get a feeler gauge, which is just a tool to help you reach the proper installation depth of the ring gear. It all comes in a pretty high quality Ziploc bag, which contains a cardboard insert which provides stiffness to the whole parcel, which is shipped in a bubble wrap envelope. The tools required for the installation are 2.5 millimeter Allen key or hex key, any tool that will have a Torx 25 bit on it or a Torx 25 socket, and a torque wrench would be recommended, but not strictly necessary. But look, you have a several thousand euros worth of e-bike. This costs literally 30 euros on Chain Reaction Cycles or anywhere on the internet. So just buy one and use it. It will make your life a lot easier. Even if you have an e-bike capable bike stand, the installation steps for the Planet 3 are much easier completed with the bike flipped upside down, since everything will be very accessible and in your face. To that end, I would suggest that you flip the bike upside down on a flat surface with something soft covering it, such as a carpet or a bear skin or whatever. Before you remove the rear wheel, I would suggest also that you shift the bike into the highest gear, meaning the smallest cog on the rear cassette. This will ensure an easier wheel removal and reinstallation. If you have a derailleur with a locking mechanism, you should extend the cage forward and lock it in place to make your life easier. The next step obviously is to remove the rear axle. So if you have a quick release, just use your hand to untighten this. Spin it until it stops gaining distance, and then just remove it from the bike. If your bike doesn't have a quick release axle, then just use an appropriate socket and extension or an Allen key. These might be a hex 5 or a hex 6. To remove the wheel, just grab your rim at the top, push the derailleur cage forward with your thumb, extend the P-knuckle back, and just extract the wheel. Now that we have taken care of the full stack developers among you with the how to remove the rear wheel from the bicycle, we move on with the actual installation of the Planet 3. First step of which is to replace the sensor carrier by the one provided in the package. You will take a 2.5 millimeter hex key and just undo this M3 bolt. This bolt is going to be reused. You will unroute the cable and extract the sensor through the hole at the rear. Now, since the new sensor carrier is 9.5 millimeters longer, you might need to get yourself some cable slack in the sensor cable, plenty of which is tucked in around at the motor. So if it's actually not free here, you will do this. Right over here on your non-drive side of the motor, where the two cables enter the chainstay, you can use your same 2.5 millimeter hex key to fish some of the cable out, like this, and then you will pull it. This will provide the slack needed. Now you will take your Planet 3 provided sensor carrier, take your big black sensor and insert it through the hole at the rear. That's what she said. Push it all the way in, that's what she said, until it bottoms out at the bottom of the sensor. Then you will route it through the side channel and then verify your position again, because you see the sensor is no longer at the bottom. This is the only issue that people had with the Planet 3 installation. So just push it all the way in, hold it with one of your fingers, then route it through the side channel and pop it onto the frame. Verify your position again, you can see that the sensor is all the way in. Now take your M3 bolt or screw and put it back in. Tighten this until the point of contact where the bolt head meets the frame, and then just go another 45 degrees. Okay, that's one pizza slice for the Americans. Next step in the installation is to remove all of the original hardware from the rotor. To do this, simply use a Torx 25 bit or key or whatever you have and just start unscrewing. It might be a good idea to replace the first two opposite screws that you remove with the ones provided by PLANET3. These are also Torx 25. They will come with Loctite pre-applied. I'm just using dry ones for demo purposes, so that your rotor actually stays centered the way it was previously. I want you to just tighten these snug and not all the way, just until the point of contact so they hold the rotor in place. We will torque up the final spec later. Now you can continue with the removal of the existing hardware. Fucking magnets. Okay. It might be a good idea to store all of this in the zip bag in which you received the PLANET3 and just have it with you in your backpack in case you ever get a branch stuck between your frame and the rotor and you crush the PLANET3. Not that it happened yet, but I don't know, just ask yourself, when is the last time that you had a branch caught between the rotor and the frame? If the answer is often, then do it. If not, nothing will go wrong with the PLANET3 all on its own. Now, before you continue, it's very important for the PLANET3 sun gear to sit on a level surface. Currently on the disc I can see that there are traces of thread locker that came out from the threads as the original screws were pulled out, or this area just might be dirty, contaminated with mud or whatever. I would highly suggest that you use a piece of like a toilet paper to just remove any of this. Spray the toilet paper with some brake cleaner. Do not spray brake cleaner directly on the hub, obviously. Okay, just a light spray. And then wipe all of these surfaces and wipe the end cap itself, because the bike industry likes to use grease wherever grease does not really have to be. Grease on the outside just attracts dirt. Blow everything out and then continue with the installation. Now, the new PLANET3 sun gear for 2020 uses a press fit which actually holds on the bolt heads. It does not make it any better than the previous one, it's just easier for me to produce. So, you will take your sun gear and pop it on top of the bolts. As you press it down, you'll feel it seat on the surface. Now, this can be done with all 6 bolts already in, or you can do it with just these 2 positioning bolts and then insert the rest of the bolts through the sun gear. Both come up to the same end, but it's much easier to press fit it now on 2 bolts than it is when there's friction on all 6 holes. Your thumbs might go white as you press it down. So just take the rest of the screws, pop them in, get them started. Now all of these are just snug. At this point you will switch to a torque wrench, set it to 6 or 7 Newton meters and just tighten in a crisscross pattern. At this point we're just going to quickly cover removal of the sun gear. So if you ever need to remove the sun gear and you have a centerline rotor, which is OEM, it comes stock on all Specialized e-bikes, you can just use a plastic pen or anything that's of a large enough diameter to not leave a dent, and it's soft enough to also not destroy the sun gear. You will just insert it into the hole underneath and then just prop it slightly up. You will do this all around the circumference in small steps until it pops off. Now the reinstallation, if you're not removing all the bolts, as I said, it's a press fit. Just use your thumbs, do not touch the surface of the rotor, the braking surface, and just press it down. You will feel when it bottoms out. And then do this on top of all the holes. Go all around the circumference until you feel no gap. It has to sit firmly in place. This press fit holds tight enough so that if I try to lift the whole wheel by the sun gear, I can do this. And this is a very heavy wheel. It has the original cassette, and it has the tire insert, and it's a 29er, and it has tubeless sealant in. And it did not move. I can press it back on, no movement. And the sun gear itself is actually like 9 grams, so you would have to hit something with like 250 Gs to dislodge this from place. Now, if you're not using a stock rotor and there are no holes on the side of the sun gear into which you can insert something, I would not really recommend that you try with a flathead screwdriver between the rotor and the sun gear, even though there is a 0.8 millimeter gap. Instead, just undo all the bolts. As you undo all of the bolts, it's gonna come off anyway, and that's the much safer way. Next step is literally the easiest of all. You just take your little planet, point the magnet side facing up, because the bottom is full. Your planet might be black, might be white, it depends. And then just pop it on and push it in so it's in mesh with the teeth of the sun gear, with the splines. When it's on top of the bolt heads, even though these bolts are made of stainless steel and they are non-magnetic, the rotor is actually magnetic, so it might be best to just pop it on top of a bolt head and then just push it in. This way it will stay on even if you pop the wheel into a vertical position, which we need for the next step. If you have ordered a dual planet configuration, which halves the ratio and the speed of the bike, but it will also count twice as much distance, you will just pop the other planet on top of a opposite bolt head. So these have to be in a 180-degree phase. Do the best you can with this just by eyeballing it. And then in the package you will also have received 2 extra magnets, which will be used for the position checking of these once the ring gear has covered them, because sometimes they do not mesh right away as you cover it, and then they will move slightly and not be in a correct phase. At this point we will cover the compatible hubs, or the hubs that come stock on the 2019 and 2020 Specialized bikes. So this hub is a 2020 model. It's from a Levo all the way from base to the, well, base and the comp. In some countries there's a comp carbon still, but not in the EU, I think. You can recognize this by the little chamfer, this kind of chamfered edge on the hub, and the fact that it has a straight 19mm profile going into the dropout. The compatible ring gear features just a round hole with 19mm. If you happen to have a Roval hub, which is featured on the Expert and the S-Works model, it's basically the same as the 2020 hub for all intents and purposes, because the end cap is just a straight 19mm diameter profile. So it uses the same ring gear as the 2020 base and comp models. If you're on a 2019 Levo, then your hub will look like this. This is a Formula DHT148S, which is just a rebranded Specialized. Well, Specialized is a rebranded Formula, and it will use a ring gear like this. It will have 2 vertical parallel surfaces, which you have to align with the 2 wrench cutouts. The way you fit these on is just you place it on top of your hub end cap, and then you will just use both of your thumbs to overlap both the end cap and the ring gear, and then just press it on. This one has been pressed on several times already, and it goes in quite nicely. The new one, each one that I send, I usually pre-fit onto the hub end cap so that it goes through the plastic deformation, so that you have no risk of shearing off these last few top layers which form a seal against dirt ingress. But anyway, even if we grab a new one, the procedure is basically the same. Just pop it on, and now it will just take a significant amount of pressure to get it started. It's important to push on this raised bevel edge and overlap both. You do not push on the outside because that will cause bending. You will still not be able to break the part, but it puts this joint into tension. So place it on and then just use pressure, rotate slightly, and then you will feel it when it pops on. Literally, my thumbs would hurt and they would turn white from the amount of pressure needed. If you're on a 2019 Levo, make sure these are lined up and then again push on the beveled edge until you feel it seat all around. Now once you have gotten this started, don't push it down with the wheel in the horizontal position, but rather switch to a vertical so we can get the proper installation depth of the ring gear, which is very important for smooth and silent and continuous operation of the device. Okay, now for the most important step. The proper installation depth of the ring gear and the device itself is reached when this vertical lip of the ring gear, the end of it, like right here, overlaps the visible edge of the sun gear. There is still a 0.8 millimeter gap between this edge of the sun gear and the rotor itself. So this does not bottom out on the rotor. It just needs to hide the visible edge. Also, the pushing still needs to be done right here. You will use your nail, basically, on your thumb or your forefinger to push this and feel it go in as you rotate the end cap. Now let's try and do it. Push down. Okay. You might get stuck at some point because the teeth of the Planet and the ring gear will not be in mesh, so it's important to do a little wiggle and rotation as you push down. But also, if you have a dual Planet configuration, that can cause one to be engaged and the other not to be, and then you have to redo it. Just push down. You can probably hear that click. That's when the Planet actually engaged. Okay. And now I will rotate. And then push again. Rotate, push again. Okay. And then you just keep doing it until, as you rotate the end cap, the sun gear's edge is no longer visible, or it's just like barely visible. We're talking about 1/10 of a millimeter here. It's also important to have your line of sight directly above this. If you're looking from outside, you will not be able to see this correctly. And for example, this is something that I would be satisfied with. And this is the level of sound that we're aiming for. If you go too deep, let's demonstrate. Okay, I'll just push this all the way. Then you can hear this. These are the teeth or the splines of the ring gear making contact with the sun gear's base. This is not what we want. So what you would do is you would grab the ring gear by the outside edges, and then just as you put your fingers into the rotor holes, it's important not to catch the sun gear underneath. So just grab the edge of the ring gear and then just pull lightly and wiggle back. And now pay attention to this. Look at the end cap here. As I pull this out, the end cap goes with it. Because on a 2020 hub and the roll hubs, the end cap is just press fit and it's held by an O-ring. So you might need to put your finger inside the end cap and then do some pulling, or help yourself with the other hand. And then once you have backed it out a little, you can push it back in and then readjust. If you have any doubts about performing this step correctly, you can always perform the following test. Just remove the ring gear completely. Then remove the Planet from the device. Push the end cap back in if you're on a Roval or a 2020 hub. Verify that you didn't catch the sun gear anywhere on the edges. And then just reinstall the ring gear with an empty device. Now once you get this to the proper installation depth where the edges are completely overlapped, like this, there should be absolute silence. The only sound are the bearings themselves. So if this is correct, then just redo it with the Planet installed, and whatever sound you can hear is only audible in living room conditions. Once you're on the trail, it's gonna kind of fall back. So Planet back in, ring gear installed, push this in, align the edges, and that's it. This is the level of sound. Now in the meantime, I did make a tool to kind of help you along with this. It's basically a copy of a feeler gauge. It's a 0.8mm thick leaf, which basically you lean on top of the rotor and lean it against the sun gear like this, and then when you pop on the ring gear, you can just visually lean it against this feeler gauge, and when it makes contact with the feeler gauge, you just keep rotating. But it's again just a visual method, same as the one with the vertical alignment. And now that it's making contact with the feeler gauge, just pull out the feeler gauge, and that's it, properly installed. So I might just start delivering these with each order, but this one obviously will not work if you have a Shimano XT rotor, because that one has a spline which is debossed 0.6mm into the material, and then you can't use this. This is only for flat surface rotors. Now if you have a dual Planet 3 configuration, the procedure is pretty much the same. So just put these on top of each of the bolt heads. This should make sure that they are all already 180 degrees. Pop on the ring gear and then just press on and try to feel each of them engage. Okay, you can wiggle left and right just very little, and I can already feel that they are both in. And then just use your feeler gauge to get the proper installation depth all around. Okay. And now just grab 2 extra magnets that you have received and just pop them on. And now you can see that they are still in an exactly 180 degree phase. If this one was out of phase, you would just remove, reset, try to reinstall with them engaging at the same time, and then you're good to go. The only thing left to do is to pop the wheel back into the bike. You can just pull the derailleur slightly back, separate the chain lines, just pop the smallest cog into the chain, aim the disc into the calipers and the axle into the dropout. You can release this back and just put the axle back in and tighten to manufacturer's recommendation. For this one it's 15 Newton meters, which if you have a quick release is just use the palm of your hand until it hurts. You may just want to shift to an easier gear before you flip the bike back over. And that's it. Now you can go ride your bike the way it was meant to be, where you are the only restriction.